curious, George or Michelle, your view of the emergence of AEW.
Sure. Well, I think we had it before. The live content ecosystem is competitive. So whether you're talking about the NFL, which kind of stands alone, or that next tier of us, the NBA, baseball, NASCAR, and then you start kind of moving down and you get to third or fourth tier. So everybody is a competitor to some degree. Ultimately, what we try to do is, drive as much engagement as we can on Monday and Friday nights. And we feel pretty good our history in doing that, and then our ability to continue doing that in the future. So they're a competitor, there's a lot of competition for eyeballs. So, and we take them seriously, and our expectation is we win.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Wrestlenomics Radio. This is the WWE Q3 2019 edition of Wrestlenomics Radio. We're going to talk about all the news that developed on Thursday's conference call and earnings report covering the months of July, August, and September of 2019. Of course, there was the documents dropped at 9 a.m. The conference call was held at 11 a.m. Vince McMahon was nowhere to be found. He was in Saudi Arabia. George Barrios and Michelle Wilson were left to do the conference call all by themselves. And eventually, WWE Talent made their way home from Saudi Arabia. I think just minutes ago, since we started recording this, the WWE Talent has escaped Saudi Arabia, and I've got a guest joining me who's also been flying around the world. Have you been to Saudi Arabia? I don't know, but Chris Harrington from AEW is here to join us again to talk about WQ2 or Q3.
Yeah, I'm here to learn a little bit more about WWE Q3 results. I was in Charleston, West Virginia this week for our live event in Dynamite.
The wrestling Google Trends capital of the world. The state that always does exceptionally well in Google Trends for wrestling-related topics.
And very good fans there, and we had a very good time. And, I wanted to learn a little bit more about what was happening in WWE, so I turned to the best source for wrestling economics and financial analysis that's out there, and that's the Wrestlenomics podcast. And I figured I would get a, like they talk about those super computers that they use for trading to get the edge on everyone else. I figured I could get the scoop on everyone else by actually being on the podcast, so I don't even have to listen to it. I already know what happens before it's released to everyone else. Unfair advantage, huh?
Yeah, the future is not just artificial intelligence, but organic intelligence right here. And you even called me the other day to a totally charitable, non-paid consultation from me about what just happened on Thursday.
I did. I was flying, and I flew from Charleston to Atlanta to Minnesota, and which is good. You'd think I'd fly to Chicago, but Chicago got snowed out, which caused a lot of travel problems on our side. So it was nice to instead go that way. And so I was sitting in the Atlanta airport, and I figured, hey, I got an hour to kill. Why not I call Brandon Howard Thurston III?
Yeah.
The man who just lost one of his purses, his winner's purse.
Yeah, uncharted territory you're referring to. I sacrificed my winner's purse so I could kick Jay Freddy between the legs, but it was well worth it. 6.5 hours there, 6.5 hours back. Well worth it, though.
Well, I was going to say, I can find out if Mr. Hager would like to work with you on a one-on-one basis, if that would help.
That's a great idea. Well, we can talk about that offline.
There we go. So WWE Q3, what was kind of a big takeaway for you as we saw this? I think for me, the biggest thing was probably seeing that stock reaction, good, bad, or indifferent. When the stock goes down as much as it did, that WWE can't be thrilled with that information.
Yeah, the stock dropped 15%. I think it maybe even got up to 16% on the day, on Thursday. Came back about 1.5% on Friday. So that's a lot of money that WWE lost in market capital. WWE announced that they were changing their profit projection. The adjusted EBITDA target moved from $200 million on the year to $190 to $180 million on the year. And as we were just talking about before we started recording, an enormous amount of that adjusted EBITDA, which again is a profit metric, is expected to be reported in Q4. They said 108 to 109 million in adjusted EBITDA for Q4. And why is this happening? Why did the stock drop? Why are the profit metrics being adjusted? WWE expected to have a MENA deal they talked about on this report, which is
what does MENA stand for?
MENA stands for Middle East, North Africa. So I think up until April of this year, WWE had a TV deal in the Middle East region with a network called OSN. And that deal expired in April, and they're looking for a deal to replace that one. George Barrios, who's the co-president of WWE, said he expected to have that deal completed earlier in Q3, but it is not completed still. Also, the India TV deal, their number 3 TV deal overall, has still not been completed, and that was projected quite a bit earlier to have been done by the middle of this year. And so that's not done yet. In addition to those things, we got a number of metrics that we're probably going to dig into deeply. A number of metrics are showing some negative decline there, so some downward trends all across.
And of those 2 deals, I think the India deal is really relevant in terms of if you're actually trying to talk about how much money is being put in the coffers from a single media deal. Like you said, the number 3 deal, a deal that I think in the conclusion of the final year of the current India deal was possibly projected in 2019 to be larger than even the UK deal in terms of media rights. The MENA deal, I don't think is actually all that relevant in terms of, big money moving or leaving. I'm sure they have had, one-off Asian deals, one-off Australia deals, other deals like that. Maybe even the China stuff that has been bigger or smaller than that. But for a company that spends obviously time in the Middle East, with the Saudi Arabia show being this past week, the MENA deal might be relevant from a strategic standpoint there, even though I don't think the MENA deal actually covers Saudi Arabia, is something specifically they might have even addressed on the Q&A, right?
I don't know if they addressed that, but I think the OSN deal, you never get real numbers publicly about this, but I got the impression that the OSN deal, which was their deal in the Middle East, was, let's see, their number 1 deal is obviously the US, UK, India, maybe Canada 4, and I would guess maybe OSN around maybe number 5 or so.
That's possible. That is possible. I mean, again, it kind of depends on each different country with, who's driving WWE Network subscribers, or whether that's becoming a pay channel or other elements of the tours that can be involved. Obviously, Australia last year, where they did the Super Showdown show, having good television distribution there in Australia helped you be able to have a huge tour like that.
Yeah. And then just another thing on the MENA deal, I got the impression that I was confused after the last quarterly call that it seemed to me that the MENA deal and the Saudi deal for these big Saudi events were somehow tied together. And an analyst did ask Barrios on the call a question about that. And in my, I'm very practiced in the language of Barrios, and I think he was saying, no, they're not tied together. That's what I took away from that this is a separate thing. I don't know if this TV deal would even cover broadcasts within the country of Saudi Arabia, but they do seem to be different things.
Because OSN stands for the Orbit Showtime Network, and it's a direct broadcast satellite provider serving the Middle East and North Africa, but it's based in Dubai. So being a Dubai-based company, I would think it's not necessarily relevant to Saudi Arabia in particular. Though it does say actually its headquarters are UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. So maybe it is related in some ways. But we also know that the Saudi Arabia deal is really part of the 2030 push. And so I would think that that's really a very different kind of bucket of money and development that's going on with them.
Yeah. So let's talk about WWE expects to still break its adjusted EBITDA record for the year. They didn't they've been projecting also $1 billion in revenue. They didn't say anything about that. So I don't know if they're going to meet that goal or not. They'll probably still break whatever their revenue record was that they set last year. I think it's somewhere in the 800 millions. But yeah, they still project that they're going to break the adjusted EBITDA record for the year, which they're projecting 180 to 190 million. And but an enormous, the majority of that is going to come. It looks like in Q4. Is that the majority? Yeah, over 100 million in Q4 is what they're projecting. And we took some time before we started recording to figure out what's going on with WWE's profit metrics and why everything is so loaded up into Q4 and there's been so much less in terms of the profit metrics in the other 3 quarters of the year. And we found this interesting passage in the most recent quarterly report on page 45.
Cash generated from operating activities was $2.3 million in 9 months ended September 30th, 2019, as compared to $121.5 million for the corresponding period in the prior year. The $119.2 million decrease in the current year period was primarily driven by the timing of collections associated with our Super Showdown event, which was held in the second quarter of 2019. This would be the Saudi Arabia event, combined with a lower operating performance and increased payout of management incentive compensation in the current year. So, three things going on there, right? Number one is they haven't necessarily got the collections from Super Showdown event, which suggests to me that's money that had not actually entered the coffers of WWE by September 30th, 2019. Number two, lower operating performance. And that was something we saw in the Q1 results, because in Q1, that's kind of where the operating income, at least delta, started, where they were Q1 of last year, they're at 21.8 million. Q1 of this year, they were at negative 6.8 million. And when they talked about that, they said it was increased fixed costs, including strategic investments, higher stock compensation costs driven by increase in the company's stock price. And so that was kind of touching on that third point, the increased payout of management incentive compensation in the current year, which was when you had a really good year in 2018, you had to pay all the executives for that. And so those bonuses and everything started to hit in 2019 is what it sounds like.
Yeah. So big takeaway I get from this is, as of September 30th, at least, the Saudis owe WWE tens of millions of dollars, not related to Crown Jewel that just happened, but related to Super Showdown that happened in May.
It would appear that that's something that they are saying at this time, based on that passage we read about at least cash receipts. I was conflating cash and operating income at one point there, but just really surprising to me to see, when you're $119 million less on hand, but you still think your adjusted OIBDA is going to be somewhere in the 180, 190 range.
So I don't want to speculate too wildly here, but let's. We know that on Thursday, Vince wasn't there for the conference call.
It sounds like it's wild speculation, by the way. So go ahead.
So Vince wasn't there for the call. He was in Saudi Arabia. He was in Riyadh. The stock took a big hit. And there's rumors about, just rumors, but there's rumors about, what's the real reason why WWE talent was left in the airport was, according to WWE's own statement, there were mechanical issues with the plane that was not able to get them from Riyadh to Buffalo in time for SmackDown. And here we have a paragraph in the most recent quarterly report that came out on Thursday saying that, the Saudis owe them, I don't know, at least tens of millions of dollars. Those Saudi events so far have looked to be worth somewhere between $30 and $50 million per event. So maybe there's rumors that among talent, I think Sean Ross Sapp has reported that there are the rumors and only rumors among talent that maybe there was a disagreement between the Saudis and Vince. Meltzer says that the real reason, perhaps only Vince knows what the real reason is. But here we have rumors of a disagreement between Vince and the Saudis, and some evidence here in WWE's SEC filing that suggests that the Saudis ahead of this event owed them millions and millions of dollars. So that's interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, when we think about why is Q4 going to be so profitable for WWE, the biggest reason is the brand new TV deals in the United States for both USA Network and for Fox kick in October 1st, 2019. So essentially, WWE has a huge step up in the amount of money that they're receiving for their television product without necessarily a huge increase in the cost of producing those shows. Though, as we will see when we get into some of the specifics here, we are seeing that live events are becoming less profitable. And exactly why that is would probably take a little bit more vetting to say, is that because attendance is down? Is that because talent costs are up? Is it because production costs are up? But all in all, what we're seeing is live events cost a lot to produce, not necessarily being profitable, but media segment is going to be hugely profitable. And I think you have a number in here that suggests that the adjusted OIBDA number for Q4 is going to be somewhere in the $108 million range, right?
Right. 108 to 109.
Yeah. And if we look at last year, adjusted OIBDA, for WWE, let me see if I can find it on the trending schedule anywhere. Adjusted OIBDA for Q4 of last year, it was 64.4 million. So we're talking about an increase of almost 36 million coming just from next quarter. So that will be very interesting to kind of look at where that is. And primarily, I would expect it to be driven in the media segment. I wouldn't expect it to be coming anywhere in consumer products, for instance. And the corporate number is hard always to kind of pull apart, because that involves everything from, the extra extra investment in staffing all the way through other kind of strategic investments that they're making on a headcount level or on other kinds of management levels, leases and aircrafts and other things that they sometimes also throw in there.
Yeah. So the stock price as of Friday's close of the market was $55.96. That's down to the levels of spring 2018, just before, I believe just before the TV deals were announced with Fox and NBC Universal.
Which is funny because I saw on Seeking Alpha a article yesterday. I didn't get a chance to read it, but it was something about like WWE is it? Let's see if I can find the exact title of it.
A tapped out growth story.
There it is. That was it. A tapped out growth story from Boox Research, Boox. And I was just amused because it's kind of like, we see all the time this endless kind of cycle of financial analysis around WWE. Either it is the hottest and best thing in the universe and it's going to shoot to $100 in a second, or it is dead and dying and is never going to rebound. And, the biggest things for people to understand about WWE is just the monumental position they've been able to put themselves in with their incredible TV rights deals, in my opinion, where, they have a really good leverage there because they have a structured revenue source for the next many years that is pretty much guaranteed revenue. And, I imagine that's very, very, very valuable when you're trying to plan out your industry. And that's why it gives them the support and the comfort for them to start making other changes in the industry around their network and other kinds of territories that they can develop and go into, because you can have essentially a better, a profile that you can operate against. And more, it's going to come from that media segment. And in that media segment, we also see that the deals like the Saudi Arabia deals get looped in there. So, it's a combination of both that improvement on TV rights and on, a 10-year deal that delivers them a lot of money in theory when they pay, I guess. But a 10-year deal. And so all those sort of different things, I just think it's always funny because it's like the financial press is always kind of sprinting after whatever happened to the stock this week, not really reacting to what's really the fundamentals one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, I think the quick overview of WWE as a company is that they've got enormous TV deals, the biggest in the history of pro wrestling. Which were a 3.6x increase over their last 5 years worth of TV deals in the US. And those TV deals are going to largely drive the company to break its financial records for each of the next 5 years through 2024 when these deals expire. And WWE is going to be pretty safe, at least until then. And who knows? And I sort of the future of WWE is in large part going to be determined by what is the future value of live sports and sports like content, and how valuable is WWE within that environment.
Well, and what's your ability to target your consumer and reach them effectively? So, the better you understand your fans, the better you can communicate with your fans or directly market to them. There's value there. So, the network right now might be seen as a pay-per-view delivery device, but, they listen to George talk about it. He will talk about how it's a big data center, right? Mm-hmm. It's a way for them to understand what you're watching, what you're buying, what you like, and how to target you. And I got to believe in 5 years from now, the more ability people have to kind of micro-target their audience against something, there's going to be a lot of other companies out there that are curious about that.
Yeah.
So it's not just media. I just want to make the point that I don't think WWE is just this TV company. They are doing other things. They're making other moves, and there's value to those moves because there's other companies out there that are going to be very intrigued about how they can partner with them because of those moves.
Yeah. At the same time, WWE has seen a lot of their metrics decline. So you want to get into this? I've created a spreadsheet that compares each of the first 9 months of the year for years 2015 through 2019. And I think you see a remarkable trend as the years get closer and closer to the present, where I've got 25 of these metrics here, and we can maybe just go through a few of them. But I've got 25 metrics, and by in 2015, the difference between 2015 and 2016, 16 of them were positive, 7 of them were negative, and now here we are in 2019, where if you compare it to the previous year, 2018, 5 of them are positive, 21 of them are negative. Does that make sense?
So yeah, let's kind of make sure that people understand what are these metrics you're looking at, since, you could be saying number of matches John Cena wrestled could be a metric. And
it should be.
That's obviously plummeted.
You would find great correlation in business success with the number of matches John Cena wrestles, I think. But should I just rattle them all off?
Well, we'll do them in like groups of 3 or something. So First we have some revenue numbers. So the first one is net income, operating income, and overall revenue. And these numbers are all 3 down. 58.4 million net income dropping to 7.8, 61.1 million operating income dropping to 16.7, and overall revenue 657.7 million dropping to 637.6 million. Drops respectively of 87%, 73%, and 3%. It is worth mentioning that for this overall net income number is just baffling. It's so low. Same with the overall operating income number. But the revenue number is obviously huge. The years prior to this, they hadn't broken 600 million, and now your both numbers are north of 600 million. But really interesting to see. This is certainly something where looking at the 12-month numbers will be very interesting. And we know that there's been small changes, whether it's collections, whether it's accounting practices with GAAP, whether it just has to do with how you're taking in certain accounts receivable. But the 12-month number next quarter will tell a big trend difference there. But WWE seems to be indicating they think it's going to bounce back. But certainly those 3 revenue numbers are down. On the flip side, the core content rights number is up 197.6 going up to 209.3 because they've always had these escalating deals. So short of changes in timing when it comes to something like Total Bellas or international TV deals that don't get renewed or number of episodes that can air in a quarter, right? So every now and then there'll be 1 extra episode or 1 less episode. You expect that number to pretty much be going always up. But for those revenue numbers, mostly down with the exception of total rights from the core content rights, which is what we understand is basically Raw, SmackDown TV rights is another way of kind of putting that.
Yeah, and I think it's remarkable that you see from 2015, revenue, net income, and operating income, they grow from year to year until this year. Or even revenue is down 3%. So I know maybe there's some weird accounting stuff happening that's going to get resolved with the last quarter, but you still got revenue that's down 3% from last year through these first 9 months of the year.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I would like to focus a little bit more on kind of what are the underlying metrics around, specific parts of the company. Because I think revenue you're sloshing together everything, right? You're sloshing together whether or not the Saudi money got paid with how many t-shirts did you sell? So let's go into maybe some of the more minuscule metrics that we can then kind of say what's happening from thing to thing.
Mm-hmm. So average network subscribers worldwide grew every year until this year, down 5% from the first 9 months of last year.
And what do you think is going on there? I have my own little theory, and I'm kind of curious to hear yours. Why do you think that network subscribers has basically plateaued and dropped?
Because I think I've seen some people tweet at me, well, maybe, there's so many more streaming options out there, and everybody's, Disney's going to launch a streaming service, and Amazon Prime has become more popular. I think, though, that ultimately it's the biggest reason of all is just the quality of the content and whether or not people want to see it and whether or not the WWE has created new stars in place of John Cena, who's more absent this year than ever. WWE hasn't created content that people want to pay to see.
I wonder, when was the relaunch kind of completed? So in January is when they signed with Endeavor to replace BAMTech.
It was like
they relaunched it in August of 2019, right before SummerSlam.
The network relaunch was like the day before the last call in July.
Yeah. So my thought is perhaps when the network kind of relaunched, that forced you or at least for me, a lot of people maybe to have to log in again. And when you had to actually go and reset your password and log in, I think that friction might have caused some people to kind of spend some time rethinking about whether or not it was worth it for them to do it, to pay for the service. And that might have caused some some amount of friction. I also think it is the launch of other streaming competitors. We are seeing, we continue to see, USA Network lost 2 million houses between this year and last year. It's 90 million down to 88 million. There are changes happening. And when you see that happening, I do think that part of that is driven by competitiveness in the streaming territory, where increasingly I'm guessing it's, the Hulus and the Amazon Primes and the Netflix of the world that are not only gobbling up some of the competitors, but at the same time, we're seeing, like you said, the Disney Pluses or the HBO Goes or the other kind of places that are launching here that are fighting for your dollar, whether it's ESPN Plus or DAZN or whatever. That's going to be a real challenge to WWE Network to make sure that they're staying relevant. At the same time, 1.6 million subscribers is a very healthy number for a service. And obviously, the goal there was probably to maintain and then try to see if maybe can grow from there.
Yet Netflix is still growing somehow.
Didn't Netflix actually have like their first quarter where they were no longer growing domestically or something recently?
Maybe I'll find a minute to look, but I think this is sort of along the lines of what Barrios will say about how everyone is competition. Our competition is the NFL, and it's Netflix, and it's Sleep, and it's what's that video game called?
Fortnite.
Fortnite.
Yes, but Netflix growth is majority driven over the last 2 quarters international. Yeah. It was actually almost negative in Q2. They actually lost domestic subscribers in Q2. They gained slightly in Q3, according to Business Insider Intelligence. But that was, of course, a big, interesting story there. And they were just basically saying Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock. Those are all things that are beginning to kind of dent, Netflix growth domestically. Is the interest in those things, at least.
So Netflix domestically has had a quarter where it was down from the same quarter of the previous year.
That's my understanding. Or the same, the prior. I think Netflix doesn't view their net additions year over year, but I think they do quarter over quarter.
Yeah.
Because they don't view themselves so much as a cyclical.
Right. Because they don't have a WrestleMania. Service. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. But anyway, so the point being, we are seeing this happening in other industries. So it's not that I think that it's a good sign for WWE. I just mean to say, I don't think we should count it as WWE is the only OTT service out there that's losing people. To me, it's a sign that the OTT, space consumers are becoming more and more, stratified and strategic in what they want to spend their money with.
So I've got global streaming paid memberships for Netflix have increased every quarter for the last, 5 quarters. I'm looking at their investor site now.
Yes. So let's look at some of these other
just real quick. Like my thought is like that, is streaming a fully mature business, like overall, as broadband becomes more ubiquitous throughout the world, as streaming devices become more accepted and people are less averse to using them, shouldn't your subscribership still continue to be growing because this technology is still being introduced to a lot of people who have yet to use it? Anyway.
Now, where I would always kind of go to my next spot is to say, if you're not getting them as network subscribers and they're not necessarily growing on TV ratings, are you getting the viewers somewhere else? Are you getting them on AVOD or YouTube? So what did we learn on AVOD or YouTube this quarter?
So AVOD views were flat, but viewing time was up. I did my own investigation on socialblade.com to just look at their YouTube channel. So when WWE reports their AVOD, which is ad-supported video on demand numbers and their KPIs, they're reporting not just YouTube, but YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. All video views across all those platforms. But if you just look at their YouTube views, the YouTube views in these 9 months versus the 9 months of the last year were actually down 13%. We went from 6.8 billion in this year to 9.8 billion in last year. And
what about other, Twitter or Facebook or anything like that?
Twitter, Facebook growth fell. Did even the other social media fall? That doesn't make sense. Oh, the growth rate fell. But the story
Facebook has basically been flat, right?
Yeah, I think
Facebook is growing at like 0.2%
Yes.
on the 9-month rolling basis, based versus a year ago. And Twitter is up 1%, but then you see other social media growth is up 11%.
Yeah.
And what I can say is my feeling is that's going to be strongly influenced by Instagram.
Yeah.
My understanding is that WWE really does a great job. Exploiting is probably the right word, but employing, Instagram as a tool for them to really, have a lot of impressions and a lot of followers and do a lot with.
And compared to Facebook and Twitter, Instagram is a newer platform. And I think Twitter, we could look into this more deeply by looking at Twitter as an investor site, but I think that the Twitter monthly active users is basically plateaued within the last year or so. I think Facebook is starting to get into a similar state, and Instagram is probably still growing. But the story with WWE, I think, is Facebook is basically flat. Twitter is gotten really slow in growth for them. But other social media, including Instagram, is still growing, but the growth is slowing down versus last year.
And when we look at like specific segments here, like live events, we see live events operating income really took a hit this in the 9-month period here. It's 8.7 million compared to 15.2 a year ago for the 9 months. The live events revenue is down 11%, 98.2 million compared to 109.8 million. And North American average attendance over 9 months here is 4,900 versus 5,200. I think the individual numbers for just this one quarter was something like, 4,400 compared to maybe 4,500, something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, North American numbers, what's probably different and is intriguing is the number of events they're running. I think they only ran something like 210 events year to date so far compared to a year ago year to date. They would have run about 246. So we are seeing them begin to run slightly less events overall. Internationally, we're seeing a contraction in attendance. Total attendance in average attendance in international is 4,800 compared to 5,700. That's the 9-month rolling number. If you're just saying, like, what does total attendance look like? They did a little over 1 million people this year for 9 months. A year ago, they did 1.28 million people. And then internationally, they did 144,000 this year. A year ago, they did 188,000 for the 9-month period. So, really just speaking to the fact that WWE is running slightly less shows and the shows are slightly less attended. And that probably drove the reason that for this year, the operating income in Q3 for live events was negative $3.5 million, which marks, the third time in 5 quarters that they've had a negative live events operating income. They did it in Q3 last year, they did it in Q3 this year, and they did it in Q1 this year. So again, I wonder if some of that comes from the fact that they might be, for instance, spending more on television shows. And when you spend more on the TV shows, you're going to see it higher media, but you're not going to see it in the live event segment. It could also be that the drop in attendance is hurting them. And I'm sure that they have run some house shows that are unprofitable, just based on the amount of, infrastructure that goes into that. And since, overall that their live events number is negative, that would seem to me to imply that you're running shows that are not profitable. But that, again, they always have those choices around, where they're marketing and what they're doing. And when you look at things like average ticket price, I know you have some numbers in here about how the average ticket price for North America is up 6% over the 9-month period to $56.64 compared to $53.68. The one thing I would say about that is whenever you are seeing a contraction in your attendance, if you're running similar sized arenas, that means a higher proportion of your fans are probably going to be the ringside people, and that's going to be the higher value seats. So I don't know whether that actually means WWE is raising ticket prices as much as it just might mean, think about it. If you sold 100 seats and all 100 of them are ringside, and then you could sell 101 seats and that next seat there is going to be a lower price ticket, suddenly your average ticket price would start to fall, right? So as soon as you contract back into more and more people being ringside or closer to the ring, the more the ticket price is going to appear higher. So you have to be able to look at both the volume and the price before you can really met out whether or not they're actually raising their ticket prices. But we are seeing an increase of the ticket price average at the same time we're seeing overall attendance for them begin to decline. On the flip side, international, it's 65.18 versus 93.18. International ticket price is always really hard to completely met out because you have, if you had the big Australia tour last year, but then this year you're going to Saudi Arabia, or if you have a currency exchange, or if you decide to run shows in Japan one time and then you don't the next year, or Mexico, or where you go in the UK. It's a little bit harder unless you start breaking it down kind of country by country.
Yeah. And I when we talk about average ticket price, my understanding is that that's not just the average of all tickets that are put on sale, but it's the average of all the tickets that are sold. So basically just revenue divided by paid attendance.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting if you look at the last 9 months or the first 9 months of 2019, it's $8.7 million in operating income. Last quarter, Q2, which contains WrestleMania, had $12.4 million. So without that quarter, this is a live events division that's losing money overall. And I'd be curious if you could just take out WrestleMania, the single events. Maybe this division doesn't make any money at all. Maybe it's all in the negative, because I could see the live event WrestleMania being worth $8.7 million in operating income.
But again, you in a certain sense, you have to think about it as a combination in my mind of both the live event and media, because, the TV show might lose money because you have to spend so much to produce that TV show. But when you add in how much you'd make for media, it might be a profitable endeavor. Just because we're reaching, we're asking for more and more. Those big LED boards aren't the cheapest things in the world.
Sure. But so how about those non-media events, as they call them in WWE corporate speak, the house shows? I've argued before, WWE, if they're losing this much money, or they're losing money on live events overall, the non-media events, the events that don't produce any WWE Network content or TV content, maybe you should run fewer of them. Maybe you would not be able to sell as much venue merchandise, which we'll probably talk about in a minute. And maybe you would miss out on, maybe there's some value in going to a town and promoting WWE and having a few thousand people go to a WWE event for a day. Maybe that has some value in it. But I think all of those things, all of that value that would be lost is probably worth it compared to the value that you would gain in terms of the improved physical health of your workers and the morale that would give them by giving them a few more days off. One of the things that people talk about, I think Meltzer talks about it when people talk about AEW, is that they've only got to wrestle once a week, whereas WWE wrestlers have to wrestle maybe 4 times a week.
I would always say that WWE has a lot of people on their roster. And so when you have a lot of people on your roster, that gives you the ability to tour a lot. And if they cut out a lot of live events, it would be very interesting to see whether they continue to employ as many people on their roster.
Yeah. I just think it's something that there's a lot of stuff here that we don't know, and we don't know what's being accounted where. But I think there should be like a serious thought about whether or not in 2019 house shows are still relevant. I understand how they were more relevant in a previous era where people didn't know what was happening on house show A versus what was happening on the next night. But it made sense in a territorial era where you had a TV show and the live event was basically what became like the pay-per-view in terms of you ran the TV to build up the angles and the interviews that would get the fans to go to the event and buy a ticket. And that's sort of been at least partially replaced by the WWE Network and by pay-per-view over the last 30 years or so that the house show becomes less relevant to the point where I think we need to consider, at least in WWE's case, whether it's even worth it to be running at least as many house shows as they do.
It's a huge question mark. I got to believe that there's a lot of pushes and pulls on it. One thing that makes wrestlers good wrestlers is the ability for them to hone their skills.
Yeah. And as I said a couple quarters ago, when we have Vince McMahon on a conference call talking about how, well, the reason why the metrics are down is because of talent absences, because of injuries. Well, maybe you'd have fewer injuries if you didn't have wrestlers wrestling as many times a week as you do.
That's certainly one of the theories about what causes injuries.
I believe you may have done some studies around that.
I have looked at the numbers. I don't know if I ever came to a firm conclusion, except for to say it appeared that people that wrestled 200 times a year were far more likely to then suffer a long injury than the people that were not wrestling 200 times a year.
Didn't Daniel Bryan quote some of your work on a Talking Smack episode or something that was sort of derived from something that Meltzer published in the Observer or something?
I do think it's been different people have interpreted it in lots of different ways. And I do recall something about that where one time it was kind of pseudo quoted.
Like all great philosophical works, they get interpreted and misinterpreted.
Well, I think actually, I don't even know if he quoted anything about injuries. I think he just quoted something about the number of times he worked, and just kind of talking about the idea of like, well, I wrestled this many matches last year and this guy only wrestled this many matches this last year and this and that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's certainly something there, but I don't know if the concept of live events is dead. I just know that, this seems to suggest that right now they're not able to turn a profit. I would like to really spend more time dividing up their attendance numbers. I mean, if they really wanted to do data that was meaningful to the investor to understand their business, the first thing I would say to them is you should be splitting your attendance numbers into televised and untelevised events, because clearly these two serve different markets, they serve different purposes, and they tell different things.
Yeah.
And one of them I can subsidize this way. The other one of them is much less subsidized except for as an engagement metric, right? So when Raw comes to Mankato, Minnesota, and does a live event, that's very different than when Raw comes to Minneapolis, Minnesota and does a TV taping, in my mind.
Yeah.
But what the fans of Mankato are engaged by having a live event there. And when you completely remove that from the mix, you do run the risk that then, yes, people are not going to be as big of a fans, because there's the one thing that I think we've seen time and time again is there is a difference between who watches wrestling on TV and who attends live events for wrestling.
Yeah, that's something I could see W splitting out in the future. I think there was even an investor slide on one of the conference calls where Barrios did break out the difference between media events and non-media events.
Yeah. The metric that really jumped out to me from this week that I thought was really unusual was the 3-month numbers on consumer product licensing, e-commerce, and venue merchandise. So consumer product licensing went down 8%, 7.8 million this quarter is 8.5 last quarter. E-commerce was down 16%, 5.7 this quarter, 6.8 last quarter. And then venue merchandise 3.5 versus 4.3. That's a 19% drop for an overall net revenue drop in the consumer products category of 13%, 17 million this quarter, 19.6 million last quarter. Why is that relevant? Well, one, you ran less events. So that venue merchandise number is actually probably not as bad as you fear, because it's actually up 4%. They made about 1007 ahead in the 9-month period up to now. Now they're making 1043 ahead. So they're still hovering around that $10 range. And to be really honest, and it was 938 per person this time and 926 last quarter. So, I mean, it's up actually about 1%. And I'll tell you, WrestleMania skews that number really, really heavily. So you really want to look at that number with and without WrestleMania to get a good feel. Number two, the number of e-commerce orders plummeted 27%. There's 115,500 orders this quarter versus 157,900 last quarter. I would love to know what changed about their e-commerce strategy to see that big of a drop. Because while the value per order went up a little bit by about 10%, which suggests people are either bundling more or the offers that they were creating were trying to kind of drive people to buy more items, or the value of those items went up, or something happening. But 27% drop on online orders just shocks me. That really shocks me. And I don't know if that's because they had an artificially high number last quarter, and this is just them coming back to reality or something different. But when I look at the 9-month number, that 9-month number is also down 26%, 394,800 versus 531,500. So that's a place that really surprises me, because I would have thought in the world here where we say there's less people coming to your arenas, maybe you can always make that argument, hey, more people are just buying those t-shirts online. And the only other place you'd expect to kind of see that right would be licensing, where you could say, okay, they're not buying it online, they're not buying it at the events, but maybe they're buying it indirectly. Maybe they're buying it consumer licensing. And even consumer licensing is down. It was 7.8 million this quarter, it was 8.6 million last quarter. Yeah. So that doesn't even explain it. So all in all, it just surprised me a little bit to see such an important thing of what I think of as like moving t-shirts, which is an interesting metric for the popularity of your brand. Even if it's not the only metric, it's an interesting one. To see that number down 26, 27%, I am just a little shocked to see their e-commerce there. Now, I should look at what the OIBDA is on the e-commerce platform, if that's in maybe the trending schedules or something.
You don't get they don't give you profit metrics for those,
for a subsection of a big category. Okay,
no, you just get the big three,
because that's the only other area that I'd be really curious about, is that, is it a case where, for instance, you were basically giving the house away before and you stopped running so many sales to drive people there, and then that's going to mean you're not necessarily giving away the house anymore. And we do actually see that the operating income on consumer products did actually go slightly up this quarter, 3.4 million versus 2.8 million. And for year to date, it's actually flat, 13.6 million versus 13.4 million on operating income. So it does make me wonder a little bit if this is also a function of maybe they're just running less sales for WWE online, and that's why the volume went down. But I got to say, personally, I feel like I'm getting bombarded with ads more and more than ever before.
Yeah. Well, on consumer product licensing, I think they noted over 3 months that video game sales were down, and I know the first thing everyone wants to think about in the last couple of weeks are the bad reviews that W2K got. Q3 would have ended before W2K was released. Maybe that has something to do with pre-orders, though. But maybe mobile games. Over 9 months, I believe the note in the 10Q was about diminished sales in toys.
Yeah, video games. The WWE 2K20 was released on October 22nd. I also see that they mentioned a Ghostbusters WWE action figure, and I never heard of that. Let me look that up. We're gonna pull aside here and see what we got. You a big Ghostbusters fan?
I was when I was like 4 years old. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I thought maybe you were going to tell me that like you never watched Ghostbusters.
Oh, no. I played the Ghostbusters game on Atari. I watched Ghostbusters on TV. I had Ghostbusters action figures. I may still have them somewhere at my parents' house. I don't know.
So if you were to guess what five relevant WWE superstars are involved in this Ghostbusters deal, I will say they at least went big.
The Big Show of Honeycomb fame.
It's Shawn Michaels, The Rock, Steve Austin, Undertaker, and John Cena.
Well, all their current top stars, right? Okay.
And it looks like maybe there's also a version that has Triple H as one of them too. No, that's Austin. It just looks a little bit like Triple H. Okay, yep. So that's the five I mentioned. So
okay.
Yes. Hey, if you're gonna sell to licensees, that's what licensees want to see, right?
They want stars.
They're gonna want the names they know and that they think are gonna sell. So
right.
It's not a dumb move, but it just kind of it does speak a lot to, if you're one of the 200 and something person on the talent, how you must feel when you see that.
Right. I mean, I have no issue with the choice. It's more about like it's the circumstances that have led to that being the choice.
Yeah. I just got completely off track from our original discussion.
It's very similar to, by the way, the SmackDown ads that I saw, which did have some current stars in them, but we're just loaded with Steve Austin and The Rock and The Undertaker and Ric Flair.
But again, if you're trying to reconnect with lapsed fans and you're trying to talk to them about Fox now being this ability for you to watch, the last time WWE had network programming, i.e. programming that wasn't locked away on cable, was probably
Saturday Night Main Event.
Well, but before that, like SmackDown regularly, because Saturday Night Main Event didn't do very well in the ratings.
Yeah.
So like SmackDown. And those were people that were around at that era of SmackDown, even if it was the tail end, yes, a lot of them were gone, but in the earlier parts, when SmackDown was hot,
yeah,
you got to sell with the assets that are going to keep the eyeballs glued. That's for sure. Talk to me a little bit about what happened on the Q&A. What did we learn? Who was there? Who answers? And was it just the same two analysts asking questions over and over again?
This was a long Q&A. I wonder if it was to compensate for a lack of Vince McMahon on the call. But there were 14 analysts who asked questions. I believe this ran about 50 minutes. We got some new pillars. Are you aware of what the new Barrios pillars are?
I think that the Titan Tower must be the most reinforced building in the world with all the pillars that have emerged over the years. But what is our three pillars right now?
There was much talk by George Barrios about the investment that they're making to the in-ring product. That's code for wrestling. But the investment that they've made to the in-ring product, Barrios said, we've also accelerated investments to support the creation of our core in-ring content while reducing or delaying other expenses to lessen the impact of that spending. So that makes it sound like, okay, they're spending less in some areas, but they're spending more in some other in the area related to in-ring content, which he said there are 3 pillars involved in creating this in-ring content. Number 1, storytelling. In some areas that was called booking. Number 2, talent, which involves recruitment, development, and retention of that talent. And number 3, the production elements that go along with producing the in-ring content.
So that says interesting things. So number 1, storytelling. I'm going to guess that is a little bit of the mantra of why do you announce Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman, right? Is that you're basically trying to make a big, bold statement about who your leadership is in that storytelling area, yes. Or the more recent announcement of Bruce Pritchard. Yes. So, something that for a long time we never heard anything about, right? Is you couldn't tell me who was quote unquote the writer of SmackDown or Raw, whether it's Dave Kapoor or whoever, Brian Gerwitz, yeah, or whomever it was, because WWE never really put that phrase forward, whether it's Road Dogg or whomever. And now suddenly that's a big deal that they're shooting out press releases about. Then number 2, talent, recruit, develop, retain. So talent and recruit. Definitely seeing a lot on that, right? Every time they do an NXT tryout class, we see pictures and names of those people. Develop NXT, arguably, bigger spotlight than ever with their USA Network exposure.
2 performance centers,
and the performance centers, the new performance centers. Yep, and then retain. Kind of an interesting one, because you could say that this is almost part of the implied people who have said they don't want to renew their contract with WWE, but they do, or the people that indicated they might not, or they might not, and then they suddenly seem like they're there longer than they originally expected. Mm-hmm. But the club, Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows kind of re-signing with WWE, wasn't that a big announcement?
I don't know if that was a big announcement. In terms of did WWE say something publicly about it? I don't know. But my impression is that since the beginning of this year, which coincides with the launch of AEW, not to mention there are other companies like New Japan, there's been an increased competition for talent, and that has caused the cost of talent. I'm under the impression that's caused the cost of the talent to go up quite a bit.
I have no idea whether the cost is going up or down. I just know that it seems like they are aggressive about.
You have no idea.
Training.
You have no idea.
I don't know what WWE pays people.
Okay. And I think it's interesting too, within this talent line, there was talk of WWE looking into maybe buying Stardom, but Bushiroad, the parent company of New Japan, has bought Stardom.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. And then the last part is production. Production, we are seeing, with the new sets and whatnot, and the new camera angles and the new, the having to shoot shows live versus taping them ever, the production costs are always going to be, an area where, as the cost of live sports goes up and the competition to portray live sports in unique ways, that's a really expensive area. And that's an area that you have to be, cutting edge, and you do have to reinvent yourself over time. And, I think even everything from the CGI graphics that sometimes appear on a WWE broadcast, right? Where they'll have a giant snake statue appear when Randy Orton's doing something, and you'll be like, is that actually in the arena, or is that an augmented reality thing?
Yes. The, what's Bray Wyatt's TV show called? The Playhouse? The Firefly Funhouse.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there was, do you have more on that?
No, I don't.
Okay. So there was also a question about whether or not there's going to be just one Saudi Arabia event in future years, or 2, as there has been for the last 2 years. This is a Laura Martin question where she asked, she basically just asked that. Barrio said that he can't talk to that right now, especially around 2020. We said, for the reasons I mentioned, we want to talk about 2020 once we've locked down several elements that are still open. So I really can't answer that question. So that's Barrios reiterating something that was already written in the press release about how WWE expects to give a lot of guidance about 2020 once they do their Q4 report, which will come out in February.
So is that WWE's way of saying that they would love to talk about Saudi Arabia in depth next year in 2020? Are they opening the door for everyone to ask them lots of questions about KSA?
I don't think so, but I think it's WWE saying, leaving it open that maybe there's not going to be 2 events, and who knows what happened. Maybe there were talks between Vince and the Saudi government or whoever he made this deal with the General Sports Authority. Maybe that was one of the issues that they were dealing around.
Indeed. Speaking of storytelling, Eric Bischoff, was there any questions about, the leadership?
Brandon Ross, who's with a different firm now. I forget the new name of it, but no longer with BTIG. Brandon Ross wanted to know about Eric Bischoff and just what the deal was there, why he was let go and replaced by Bruce Pritchard. And Barrios said he's not going to talk specifically about any individual, either Paul or Eric, because Brandon Ross's question mentioned Paul Heyman as well. But we feel really good about the changes we made to the structure of the creative process.
Wow.
Feels really good about the creative process. So
it's good to know.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was just intriguing when you're seeing press releases like about Bruce Pritchard and whatnot. Just again, I think understanding, I say it all the time, but the more you understand, the business priorities of the presidents of WWE, Barrios and Michelle, the easier I think it is to interpret some of the information of how they share. Mm-hmm. So in this case, like understanding that storytelling to them is a big deal, then suddenly it makes more sense about why you're suddenly going to make a announcement about how Bruce Pritchard is an EVP, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to say, why is this going on? So when on October 15th, when he was named the executive director of SmackDown, it was very interesting here. And they mentioned he has an extensive background in character development and creative storytelling.
Bruce Pritchard does.
Yes, that was the way they put it. So just intriguing situations for sure. What other questions have people kind of come to you with to say, hey, Brandon Howard?
Well, there was one more interesting question on the conference call about, I believe it's Mike Hickey is that Benchmark, Mike Hickey? Anyway, he asked about the emergence of AEW, if Barrios had any thoughts on that and the impact of the business. And Barrios went into his line about, well, everyone's competition. There's this tier where NFL is sort of on its own, and then there's this next tier where we live in the NBA and baseball and NASCAR. Everybody's a competitor to some degree, and we tried to drive as much engagement as we can on Monday and Friday nights, notably leaving out Wednesday night. And there's a lot of competition for eyeballs, but we take them seriously, he says. Our expectation is we win.
And what was the WWE announcement, after the first week of ratings where they talked about, remember they put out their announcement about, let's see if I can find it. Just when they had the quote right after the first week, they specific. Yeah. Well, no, this first week of NXT versus AEW, they had kind of their.
I heard something about that, but I didn't see it.
Oh, they just released something where they said it very clearly, like congratulations, welcome to the dance, something like that. I can't remember now, but I just thought it was intriguing. That was one of the first times that we saw them kind of preemptively react. But I think it's going to be a question that it's always fascinating to me when analysts discover that there's other wrestling companies out there. Mm-hmm. Like as if Ring of Honor, TNA, New Japan, and lots of other MLW, lots of other companies haven't existed in the past. And it's intriguing to see how long their focus on those things is, whether it's short or long. So it will be something to watch, I think, going forward here, just to see, what's the narrative. And part of that narrative is certainly created by the wrestling media itself. In the clickbait world, there's this desire to make things into wars, and there's a desire to make things into information that can be immediately digested into a winner and a loser.
Yes. You're being very nice as usual. But I think this situation with AEW is very different from all the other companies that have come in the last 20, 25 years or so, even TNA at its peak. Sure, TNA was on Spike, and that was in a lot of homes. But unlike AEW, TNA didn't demonstrate such an ability to sell tickets to events and to sell out major venues as AEW has. What else has been there? Nobody really in the U.S. I mean, New Japan has done some impressive houses, but New Japan is not. They're not based here. They're based in Japan. They're only ever going to run a minority of events in the U.S. in all likelihood. Although they just did roll out the New Japan USA brand, so who knows what will happen. But,
New Japan of America.
Is that what it's called?
I believe, I think it's something like that. New Japan Pro Wrestling of America. And you do have to think that would be a competition for their NXT brand in terms of fans, interest, and markets and building size.
Yeah. And I guess another difference between AEW and, say, TNA is the backing. The backing for AEW is a bit more serious than the Carter family. Anything to add to that?
Just that, partnerships are important. So, seeing Turner, Warner Media, involvement with AEW is also very relevant, because it's a very big company and has a very big backbone.
Yeah. Ted Turner is after them again. There was another, just a follow-up question about, Barris didn't really give an answer to it, but the question was whether AEW is challenging the normal expense that WWE expects to be put on talent, whether there's any challenge that AEW is putting on their engagement metrics. Chris Jericho was named specifically as someone that WWE lost. He wasn't mentioned, but you could also add Dean Ambrose / John Moxley to that list. And Barris' response to this was basically just to go through his talking points about how they're investing in those three core elements, those three pillars of talent to attract, develop, and retain.
So do you think AEW's three pillars are like blood, guts, and
things of that nature?
Probably things of that nature. Yes.
Yeah, I would have to ask the AEW CFO.
I don't know if AEW has a CFO.
No. Yeah. Maybe the vice president of business and strategy then.
That's a good question.
Yeah. What
questions did Wrestlenomics listeners send you?
Wrestlenomics listeners sent me a few questions. First question here is this is from the Beast Slayer 667. There are a lot of questions on the call, he writes, about WWE spending too much on talent and it's hurting their profits. Do you think there is a genuine concern and they might need to stop stockpiling so much talent? I think it's an expense that WWE can afford. I think compared to the enormous TV rights fees that they have that are guaranteed and that are going to escalate over the next 5 years, I don't think that the expense that they're having to pay for talent right now is so large that it really puts a lot of pressure on them compared to the enormous money that they're going to get coming in for TV rights. I think we just went through all these different metrics that are declining, with the big exception of core content rights. That is the rights fees that they get for Raw and SmackDown. And they're only going to grow enormously over the next 5 years. And I don't think the expense of talent, I don't have any real numbers, but I don't get the impression that the expense of talent is coming close to really causing a problem for them.
I think there's other second order challenges that things create, which can be good or bad. So this last week, the big deal was they couldn't have so many people come back for SmackDown, right? So what did WWE do to react to that?
NXT came out.
Yeah, NXT came in. So they were able to say, hey, and vice versa. What did they do to NXT when the ratings began to flag?
Go ahead.
Pulled a couple stars from the other brands, right? Like Finn Balor coming back to NXT.
Right. I don't know if that was a reactive decision, but yes.
But my point being, you do get the ability with a large talent pool to shift when you're dealt difficult hands in other ways that you might not have been able to do normally. So there is, having a lot of talent can also have positive effects that you can, react to things in different ways. What I would worry about is a class size argument. If you have a ton of people down in the PC and you're at a point here where it's very hard to really get the attention or the growth or the, ability to stand out, is that infrastructure built in such a way that you can continue to recruit people there and you can continue to get people to develop in a meaningful way? Yeah. Is there a challenge at a certain point where you're just losing people in the mix?
Yeah, this brings to mind something Barrios did say when I said he danced around the question. He did bring up the fact that, we think people will pick WWE because we have the biggest platform by an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude than anybody else. And he did say wrestling companies.
Yeah. And let's be honest, in terms of major market media shows, they have more major market media shows than anybody else. They have Raw, they have SmackDown, and they have USA all appearing on major cable networks as first run programming. Everyone else has one show at most.
Yeah.
So they are much, much bigger and they're running hundreds of shows, and that's not even including all the NXT shows that they're running. Each year. And so they do have that ability to do that. Is there a genuine concern? The only thing I would ever wonder is with all the lawsuits that have ever happened a lot of things that they come up with is they say the statute of limitations has run out and we can't even evaluate your claim because the statute of limitations has run out. I wonder if you have that many people and they become that disgruntled, is that going to change?
Or maybe someone starts a union or questions the class action lawsuit over the independent contractor employee issue. Next question.
Similar question from someone.
We can read through it and read through it and see if we've already answered this. But what does WWE talent roster payroll look like, and has it increased in proportion to TV rights increase? It's an interesting piece as it relates to the profitability and margins on TV deals that had to have changed thanks to increase in competition for talent this year.
So in other words, did getting more TV money equal more money for the wrestlers themselves? Probably not directly. Did competition in the wrestling space mean that some deals might have improved for some people? Hard to say, but that's certainly been reported by others.
Yeah, and others have reported that the talent in NXT, who are now appearing not just on the W Network but on USA Network, have not gotten pay increases that maybe they expected. MJ from NJ, who asked that question, also asks, we know the stock took a massive hit. How did this Q's negative trend stack up to past quarters pre-TV deals, and where was the stock at that level? How do we quantify the magnitude of U.S. TV rights increases in terms of stock price and market cap of company?
That's an interesting question. I mean, part of it is to say that the WWE stock never really shot above $20 a share for years and years and years and years. So, the fact that they're at $55 now is just totally different world. So, it's hard for me to kind of even conceptualize, kind of some of that question. Arguably the market cap thing is intriguing from the standpoint of, let's see here. So yeah, WWE stock for years and years, it when it first launched was maybe around $24 a share. Then it was hovering between 10 and 20. Then it was under 10 for a while, shot up to, near 20. And then it was that whole WWE, rights, climb and decline. So in mid 2014, which was the last kind of big deal making time where they shot as high as $31 in middle of March. And then by the end of May, it was already down in that $12 range. So, it's just at $55, we're already still in a different stratosphere to where it was. In terms of the market cap of the company, for years and years, the market cap of the company was not that impressive. Now the market cap of the company has, really entered that billions of dollars range, partially because of the new TV rights deals.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm really answering his questions, but those are just things to think about.
And I would think about, the stock price even before the TV deals were announced, the stock price was increasing, and maybe some of that was speculation on upcoming TV rights deals, but I think it was getting up to in the 30s or so, right? And then they got this 3.6x deal, and there's a lot of speculation that the India deal would be an increase as well. The expectation that the UK deal would be an increase too, and it looks like it's not much of an increase. So I think that's why we've seen the stock price shoot up from 30 to 100 to 55 right now.
Yeah. What impact will the Q4 results have on the stock? Interesting question. The first thing is it depends on how they perform against what they promised, right? The reason the stock goes up or down most of the time is whether or not they outperformed or underperformed versus the expectations that were set against them, not necessarily whether they're doing better or worse than they were a year ago.
I think the big questions about what the stock does related to anything that we learn in Q4 is sort of the same things that were an issue in this quarter. Is there news on an India TV deal? Is there news on a MENA TV deal? Is there news on whether there's going to be one event or two Saudi events next year?
And I will also add a question that they had from, I think, one of the analysts, which is, does the NXT television show joining USA Network have any meaningful impact on their revenue or profit?
Yeah. Some reported that's worth an average of $30 million a year.
But what was George's answer when he was asked that question?
He didn't make it sound like it. We would have to look in the transcript. He didn't give a clear answer. He didn't. I think he basically just sold it as, we've decided to take this off the network and put it onto, in this case, the USA Network, for the sake of building this value like we've built with Raw and SmackDown of enormous live TV rights revenue. Not at all necessarily saying that it was worth a lot of money or any money.
Well, you would expect that their 2019 OIBDA projections would have gone up if it was worth a ton of money and hadn't been baked into the process already.
Yeah.
Unless other metrics have dropped so much that they counteracted that growth.
Yeah, and in the larger picture of WWE, $30 million a year is nice, but it's not a ton.
No, it's not. You're right. 30 million revenue a year is not necessarily a lot of OIBDA, adjusted OIBDA, depending on, what that margin looks like. Because again, the cost of producing live television can actually be quite expensive.
Yeah. That was from Sebastian Matila. And this is from Bix. Has W ever outright said that the other segment contains the Saudi money? It does, and they have said so.
That was my answer too. If I were to go back, I don't think they admitted to it the quarter that it happened, but I swear then the next time that they lapped that quarter and the timing was different, they said something like, "This is due to the timing of our Saudi event."
Yeah, I mean, we could look into the quarter reports and the 10Qs. I believe there's a sentence or two that will confirm that.
But interesting question for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Well, that has been our takeaways from the WWE Q3 and also more accurately WWE Q1 through Q3 comparison. You've got a bunch of documents that I don't know, are you putting these out there for the world to see?
What do you mean?
All these metrics, all these charts, all these things you've done.
I should be doing another PDF, which I did for the last quarter. I did the last one though for Q2 before the WWE report. And I've now told myself that I'll do this one after the Q3 report so that I have the up-to-date WWE data. So I should be doing that very soon. Should be.
Okay.
Should be.
So that will hopefully mean that people are able to not only support your work by going and downloading it and possibly even offering you a pay-per-click thing, but they can see something.
Pay per download. I would never be compensated by pay-per-click.
Oh, okay.
I would never accept such a situation.
Thinking maybe it becomes the articles that then people are repurposing for their websites.
No,
would you suggest people that run wrestling websites just to download your PDF and then turn it into a series of articles?
Sure, I would be fine with that, especially if they included a link to the if I put this on PayHip so that they can.
Well, there you go.
And through PayHip is a thing where you can download for free or name your own price.
And it helps pay for hip surgeries?
It can. It certainly can pay for hip surgeries.
Oh, good. How is your hip doing?
My hip is fine. I'm in great physical shape because unlike W wrestlers, I'm not wrestling 4 nights a week.
Ah, I see. When is the next time you're wrestling and how can people see you?
The next time I'm wrestling is next Saturday in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I'm actually wrestling Jay Freddy. That won't be on any streaming service, though. I am wrestling for ESW on November 23rd in Lockport, the biggest show of the year for Empire State Wrestling. And you should be seeing me in the coming weeks, probably, again, for uncharted territory on IWTV.
Wonderful. I'll be in Charlotte, North Carolina this week for Wednesday's Dynamite, and on Saturday, Full Gear pay-per-view.
Who are you wrestling?
For the Royal Farms Arena in Baltimore, Maryland. Yes. And it'll be a great card, and we recommend people that are interested in watching cool professional wrestling consider buying that pay-per-view event. I'm not going to give the whole plug just to make it not seem like a paid endorsement or anything like that, but I'm sure if you just Google Full Gear AEW, you can find out more information.
And if you want to meet Mookie, just look for the flat cap. Right?
There was great panic on the internet when I said I had lost my hat. And I was able to find it, but not everyone saw that it was found. And so there was great concern at one point. But no, I will have the hat. I do wear the hat. I have been stopped at every event I've gone to where someone has recognized me. And
did police officers in Florida have to recover it for you?
No, I had lost it in Minnesota, actually. I just misplaced it in my house. I found it. I returned it. And I do wear the hat whenever I go to the events. And last week, I took the hat off. After the event, when I came down to the bar, and my coworkers literally did not even recognize me. True story.
Will those hats be available at AEW merchandise stands in the future?
I don't think that I have a royalty rate set up with the company, so I don't even know if it's in my interest to try and sell those hats.
Will they be available at ProWrestlingTees.com then?
Maybe they should be available at Wrestlenomics.com. And the money should go to fund a cup for Jay Freddy.
Just set up a PayHip. There you go.
A payhat.com.
Okay.
Well, it's been a fun catching up with you, Mr. Brandon Howard Thurston III. It's been a interesting time to learn more about the WWE results, and I appreciate you letting me tag along so I can go through this analysis on your dime.
Absolutely. And thanks to the Voice of Wrestling Podcast Network for hosting us as always. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.